clearly understand the energy that he brings to the table and drives us forward. I also have Mr. Jim Spaeth, Department of Energy, USA. Jim serves as a US Department of Energy Bioenergy Technologies Office System Development and Integration Program Manager. He is leading the DOE deployment and market strategy development for sustainable aviation fuels. His current portfolio includes DOE investments in integrated biorefinery projects focused on the development of advanced biofuels and bioproducts, including sustainable aviation, marine, and other heavy-duty biofuel applications. Welcome, Jim. I have Dr. Gerhard Ostheimer from Clean Energy Ministerial and BioFuture Campaign. Gary, as we all call him, is a co-founder and global strategic officer for the Global Biofuture Solutions, providing leadership to address the growing need to rapidly create a low-carbon bioeconomy by developing and managing a suite of high-quality tools and services that can accelerate rapid deployment both domestically and internationally. Please welcome Mr. Vikram Gulati, Country Head and Executive Vice President for Toyota Kirloskar Motor. Mr. Vikram Gulati has been working with Toyota Kirloskar Motor since 2017, and currently he heads the country as well as is the Executive Vice President for Corporate Affairs. And prior to this, he has also worked with Government of India in different capacities. Let me start and kick off this discussion by straightway coming to George. George, biofuels are a proven pathway as sustainable climate action for GHG reduction. I think there is no more dialogue around that. But how can we enhance the international cooperation in the field of biofuels to accelerate the net zero campaign?
No, thank you for the question. And at the very beginning, I would also say a big hi to my co-panelists. It's always a great opportunity to meet them. And Shishir, congratulations. You were crossed in this panel. You've gotten from academia, you've gotten from the industry as well as from the government. So that itself, I think, I don't need to say anything more because that itself tells you how important biofuels are, how mature it is, how the fact that we are all ready to be here, and the need for international cooperation. So amongst the panel, you have representation from the United States and India as well. So I think that itself is a really good sign. Now, there were two words which I thought were really good when you, in the video you showcased. So for example, it's inevitable and it is promising. I think those two are really important key themes. Why do I say it is inevitable? Because there's a certain amount of maturity which has come to at least certain amounts of certain technologies in the biofuel sector. So 1G, for example, India has been a case in point. So in about 8 years, we've been able to ramp up from about 1.4% blending to over 10%. And we've been doing that and we've been achieving these goals well beyond our targets. So much so that we've advanced our targets of E20 by 5 years. And that's not a small amount. At the same point of time, there's a whole bevy of biofuel technologies for which international cooperation and collaboration is essential. Why am I saying this? Now let's look at beyond 1G, when we look at 2G, when you look at SAF. In these areas, there is a need for international collaboration to answer a few questions. For example, feedstock management. How do we aggregate and the necessary feedstock so we can ensure continued increased production of biofuels? IEA likes to quote that, we are well behind what we need to achieve for a net zero world. They say that between now and 2030, we need to go at 3x our production targets. Now, and that would, I believe, require a 16% growth per year. Now, in India, we're ready to achieve that. And I'm sure globally as well, that there is a certain amount of readiness to achieve that. But we need that amount of collaboration, that cooperation to, number one, share those technologies, to bring about efficiencies in those technologies, to ensure the necessary feedstock management, so that, and ensure that the supply chains remain robust, so that we can achieve these production targets. And these targets, I'm sure, are achievable, as India has showcased. And in fact, recently today morning, there was a very good article which spoke about how Spain is using 2G technology, 2G feedstock for international shipping fuels. In that same vein, for the other sectors, be it shipping and aviation, there's a whole area, there's a whole important gamut for cooperation, which we can do and which we should do. And it is only through collaborative action that we can achieve these targets. Because otherwise, what would tend to happen is that we would have pockets of development you can say in a sea of options and potential which we're not achieving. So that is therefore we need a whole web of collaboration between producers, consumers, those areas, those countries who are willing and who have the potential, but may lack a certain amount of factors in the value chain. Those who are interested, those who expressed interest, countries of the global south as well, to achieve these targets. And I'm sure that the robust participation in today's seminar, and I heard there was someone from Mexico as well. So the fact that we have so many people here who have tuned in to listen to us showcases that there is an appetite for global cooperation. And from our side, we are ready to have that global cooperation. In fact, under Fuels of the Future, biofuels, and during India's G20 presidency, biofuels was a very important key area of cooperation. During the energy transition ministerial meeting, we had done a ministerial session in which Jim had spoken as well on consultations and recommendations. We identified that there is a whole host of areas to cooperate. In fact, the speaker from the ICAO said that we need to reach about 450 billion liters of SAF production. Now, this has to be achieved in 21, 22 years. That would require a collaboration in setting up of standards as well. So with that, I would like to say the scope is immense. There is a whole host of area we can collaborate. There is interest to cooperate. And through sessions like these, we can build up on such collaborative efforts towards achieving what we all know is our target, which is a world where we can ensure sustainable development, where we can ensure energy security, where we can ensure that there is a certain amount of energy justice as well. And by energy justice, I don't only mean creating employment, and we saw through your presentation as well the amount of employment we can generate, but also ensure that all countries have access to energy, without which we can never achieve any of the targets. Energy transition would require and would be dependent on this. So therefore, I believe it's a very fertile area and it's a very right time for having such cooperation. And I'm sure that we can continue to collaborate on all these areas which I had mentioned.
Thank you, George. Gary, let me cross 7 seas and come over to you. And you've been a strong advocate of a greater collaboration between the government and industry for acceleration of biofuels. And you've been part of several dialogues on that front. What are the distinct challenges that you see on both sides of the equation, and what are your thoughts on possible approaches that we could take to overcome these?
Well, thank you, Shishir. And as George said, it's always a pleasure to see you all. Fortunately, I think it was only a few years, feels like a few years. It was only a few weeks ago that we got to see each other together in Goa, which was for a meeting of an activity called the Clean Energy Ministerial, which we can talk about later if that was interesting. But the purpose of the Clean Energy Ministerial is across the entire clean energy sector to bring together industry and governments in order to break down silos and to chart a path forward. Because there's some overall challenges that exist for the biofuel sector. So we've had a lot of success with ethanol, and ethanol provides a lot of very helpful solutions. Ethanol is a very useful molecule, both itself as a fuel and itself as an intermediate to go on to additional fuels. And so we've been making ethanol, obviously, for a very long time, but at the industrial scale, we've gotten quite good at it, and Praj has been one of the leading technology developers for that. But if we look to other fuels, if we look to the need to broadly defossilize, fuels such as renewable hydrocarbons that we would want to use in aviation, fuels like longer hydrocarbons that we would want to use in maritime, fuels and chemicals, the whole array of what we now call petrochemicals in the future need to be converted into renewable chemicals in order to have the circular economy that we all talk about. We can be very frank here and just say that the challenge is price, right? So it's a more straightforward process to take carbon out of the ground and then turn it into a fuel or a chemical, as opposed to revising carbon, biogenic carbon. And so as such, because price is the challenge, because we're early on in some stages of technology development, there is this need for both individual innovation that can happen from the private sector, and as George was alluding to, sort of dissemination and broadening and strengthening of the sector as a whole, which you need government to do. And so I think that to move up the experience curve and down the cost curve in order to get prices to be more competitive, we need to have that close communication, and we need to have those motivating catalytic early policies, which we can elaborate on in the future. And so government frequently expresses a desire to understand what industry needs. And I would just say that in my experience, and I'll finish with this, is that the government and industry tend to work on different timescales. And government, the processes for having various programs funded tend to work almost anti-cyclical to the needs of industry. And so there's a bit of patience and there's a bit of learning that is needed on both sides in order to really accelerate growth of the sector. So thank you, and I'm happy to elaborate on any of these topics.
Thank you, Gary. So let me move to then Jim. Jim, both the speakers talked about the overall framework and the ecosystem that needs to be in place and the challenges, and the need to move beyond ethanol as a molecule and use that as a base to further build on higher molecule chains. And SAF is definitely one of the clearly emerging opportunity areas globally. And since the aviation sector, which is the user of SAF, is also global in its nature, the large scale adoption for SAF is definitely very, very challenging, because obviously everybody is subjected to very differentiated set of laws and pulls and pushes into different ecosystems. In your experience, and you've been the champion of this, what can we do to enhance the international cooperation in this regard so that it becomes easy for airlines to adopt SAF?
Well, Shashir, thanks. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thanks for the question. And we're dealing with very challenging issues here. The previous speakers, George and Gerard, have both given great overviews and covered a lot of the territory. But there are many opportunities and the need for us to come together in many different types of international fora. This webinar is just one type, but I think we need to look for numerous opportunities to gather together in person, to sit down and talk about what we've learned, sharing lessons learned in technology, and what's working and what's not working in policy, and working on issues like sustainability and financing. All these areas are not going to just magically come up with solutions. It's going to take all of us working together across the world and to help spread the awareness of the need and the opportunity of bioenergy and biofuels. As George said, quoting the IRA, we need 3 times the amount of biofuels, and we need to hasten its progress between now and 2030 and on to 2050. And I would say, along with this international cooperation, we need each country to do a lot of hard work on their own. Many of you are aware that in the US, we have what's called the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Grand Challenge, and it sets goals of, just for US production, 3 billion gallons of SAF by 2030, and reaching 100% of aviation fuel production or coverage by SAF in 2050. So none of these goals are going to be easy. it takes, as Gerard mentioned, an investment both of the government and private sector. And in the US, along with the Grand Challenge, we have tried to document and lay out a plan of what it's going to take to get there. And it's not easy. It takes tremendous development in many different areas. In our Grand Challenge roadmap, we've identified 6 areas of action. And I think these similar types of actions are going to need to occur in every country. So in our action plan, we have identified increasing feedstock research and development and diversification, continued conversion technology development, lowering costs, improving efficiencies and yields, building supply chains, first demonstrating the complete supply chains from feedstocks in the field through delivery to, in this case, SAF to the aircraft, first demonstrating how they can work and what is needed, and then commercially building those up and building up that capability, which is needed widely, especially in our international airports. And along with that, we need to have analysis that supports policy development. And we need to be talking to getting the word out, educating our global partners about what's required, about how difficult this is, but what the opportunities are. And if we bring that hard work together, government investment and private industry development, and increasing investment from both sides, because even in the US, we have the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a stimulus. It provides some policy, and it provides a modest amount of investment, but not sufficient to achieve our goals. So we're hoping for, even in the US, greater investment annually as time goes forward. So I'll just wrap it up there saying we need to do the hard work at home, and then we can bring together lessons learned and come in various international fora and through various leading organizations and convening organizations such as the new Global Biofuels Alliance and the Biofuture Initiative at events like COP and SEM and UN Climate Week to look for those opportunities and beyond that, because even those won't be enough. Those are great opportunities for highlighting the need and the opportunity, but we need to sit down together in smaller groups and work out these challenging issues and help each other grow the biofuels future. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Jim. So we are sort of flying high with SAF and discussion around that. Thank you so much for that very informative response. Would like to let me come back to ground and in a different context. So Vikram, Toyota is also is the major global player as far as the automobile industry is concerned. So you probably have experiences of very different markets and how the different challenges are being met. We already heard that we all know, for example, Brazil is already at E27 as a de facto standard. They are already experimenting with E30. And as George mentioned, India is setting new standard in how quickly a country can adopt itself and accelerate adoption of biofuels when the government policy and the industry action both sort of align very well. Can you say from your perspective where you stand today on what are the impediments on the large scale adoption of biofuels into vehicle ecosystem in India?
So first of all, thank you for having me on this very important panel discussion. I hope I'm audible, and with that, I'll just kind of begin my answer by saying that the transport sector, I mean, the entire economy world over, but particularly the transport sector, is going to face a scenario of energy transition much faster than many other sectors, perhaps, and it'll have to lead the way. The other point that we must recognize is that globally, different markets have different strengths, different opportunities, primarily around the energy mix, the infrastructure readiness, and consumer adoption issues. And therefore, no one energy pathway is really going to be the solution to the journey towards sustainable mobility. Having said that, as Toyota, we have play in most of the sustainable technologies, whether it's the entire range of electrified technologies or biofuels or even hydrogen. But for India, I think this is most impactful low-hanging fruit that we can leverage to have a most rapid shift in a most scalable manner. And the reason why I say that is most of the requirements for a transition are already there or can be put in place very rapidly. For instance, if you look at the supply side, the fuel, the feedstock is local, there is good capability in terms of converting the feedstock to ethanol. The dispensing infrastructure already exists. Indian automotive industry is very competitive on the combustion engine technologies, which can be modified to take higher blends, whether it is E20 or whether it is the flexi-fuel vehicle technology. So in a matter of speaking, from those otherwise very challenging issues of putting up new infrastructure or bringing in new technology or having access to manufacturing ecosystem, all of that's already there. But I would be not being 100% truthful if I say there are no challenges. There are going to be challenges. And challenges are really going to be around the key factor of consumer acceptance. And that, I think, is key to any energy transition. The first and foremost challenge we see is the fact that, from the Brazil experience, ensuring that there is good quality fuel available, in most part of the country, for which, appropriate standards and auditing systems have to be put in place. We are confident that that is not a big issue. It will get done. The issue that really one looks at is today we have ethanol available, which is well beyond E20. Country is talking about flexi-fuel vehicles. Now, when you go into flexi-fuel vehicles and electrified flexi-fuel vehicles, it does mean that the manufacturing cost of the vehicle is going to go up. And hence, the policy support needs to come in for consumer to choose this, because the gap in the either in the acquisition cost or the operation cost has to be met to make it economically viable for the consumer to choose this option vis-a-vis the conventional petrol or diesel ones. On the acquisition side, while FFE has a minor challenge, but if you're going for electrified FFEs, the challenge is bigger. Merit-based taxation, in my opinion, can be a very impactful, simple solution from a policy perspective, which is transparent and neutral, which can solve this problem. The other issue really is going to be around the other regulations which impact the OEM side, which is the carbon emissions. It is seen that due to fuel efficiency loss, there is going to be an impact on CAFE, and therefore the industry is also talking to the relevant ministries in the government to look at giving an appropriate merit to use of ethanol, because from a well-to-wheel life cycle perspective, ethanol is the cleanest fuel from a carbon emission perspective. So, all in all, what I would like to summarize is there are huge opportunities. It's a low-hanging fruit. It is probably the energy pathway of choice for India, because one can transition in the fastest possible manner and its scale, which is needed right now for the industry, with minimal trade-offs, with making the transition disruption-free. But policies need to come in which signal not only to the industry, but also to the consumers to choose this as a technology of choice when it comes to a choice between gasoline or a diesel or ethanol powered vehicle. So with that, I'd like to hand it over back to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Vikram, for that very, very elaborate comment on what can be done and how it can be accelerated. I would like to go back to George. George, you mentioned, and I think this is now an accepted fact, that the EBP20 program for decarbonization of the road transportation in India has become a very, very strong program that everybody can sort of look at and learn from as to how a country can really transit in a short period of time. And if we look at the next challenge, then is, of course, there is other things that have to happen on the ground for the surface transport in India, which some of which Vikram mentioned. But if we look at emerging, and I think other speakers also mentioned about it, that the new frontier seems to be sustainable aviation fuels and what happens there. What do you think could be done to accelerate and emulate the success of EVP20 in adoption as far as SAF is concerned?
So that's a good question. And like you said, that there is a whole pathway which we can focus on. I would say the immediate, of course, answer is your 1G or 2G, which can be used for surface transportation. But the real kick or the real crunch comes in terms of SAF, because there is no other form, or at least we don't know any other existing form of ways to decarbonize the aviation the transport sector. There were some ways of trying electrification. They found that the batteries were so heavy that you cannot really electrify aviation transport, while you could maybe do that for surface transport. So you're right. SAF, of course, is one of I would say one of the sweet spot for the biofuel sector. And in fact, let me also congratulate you. About a month and a half ago, you had done a test run from Pune, if I remember correctly. But heartiest congratulations for that. And in fact, you had done some economics for the costing as well, which in fact from the ministry was my main fear. And when we had discussed the costing, it wasn't that much higher. And so that was always a plus and a plus side, because Vikram is right that in the end, the consumer is going to be very cost conscious. So there has to be a need to ensure that the additional cost which comes to the consumer is enough for him to choose the more sustainable path. Because yes, there is a push to choose a sustainable path, but there has to be an economics behind it as well. Because in the absence of there being a strong economics behind it, it would of course be difficult for him to make that choice. And this is more so true when you're looking at the developing in the South countries, because as I'm sure you're aware, in fact even in terms of India, when you look at the energy consumption, it's almost a third of the average. Not the highest, but 1/3 of the average. And when, in fact, the Economist last year had done an analysis of Africa, and I sometimes like quoting this, where it says that the average African uses less energy than is used by an American fridge. So the challenge, therefore, continues to remain to how do we drive down the cost? Because of course, and in that the challenge also becomes, because what pathway are you using to produce SAF? Is it the ethanol pathway? Is it the UCO pathway? And in each of them then would have their own challenges, because how do you ensure, and I came back to this in my initial speech, how do you ensure the feedstock availability to ensure that it is used towards SAF? Because there is, and as a country like India, sometimes there are a lot of advantages in dovetailing these two approaches, because India is actually on the path for urbanization. So the municipal solid waste is actually going to go up. The Indian population also is on an upward curve. According to some data, we're already the largest population in the world. So our consumption would, of course, create pockets of used cooking oil, which are important feedstocks. So there's a need, and coming back to international collaboration as well, on two aspects. Of course, both have been mentioned. One is to ensure the standards are in place. So because the CORSIA mandates itself has the need for ensuring certain standards of reduced carbon dioxide emissions. So we need a mechanism where we can set these standards and we ensure there is transparency across the pathway, so that when we're utilizing that, it's not that even if you do have to pay a slightly bit of a higher price, there's a certain amount of comfort that yes, you are contributing to a decarbonized future. So I think that is really important, and that's a question which we have to answer. Number two is to ensure, the basic question is how do we ensure the enough amount of SAF? We have all countries together agreed to set certain targets where we reduced our emissions, but that of course would only depend on ensuring enough of SAFs. So towards that, I think the answer to a lot of these is also on ramping up the biofuels pathway, because the more ethanol you have, the more available used cooking oil feedstocks you have, you can actually ramp up production of SAF. And so in India, we're looking at, and I think Indian model is very interesting for other countries because we are a developing country, yet we have set a certain amount of these mandates. We can actually showcase to the world that you don't only have to be a developed, rich country to achieve these targets. Even as a developing country, when it's part of your national conscience and a national thought process, you can achieve that. So we do have an SAF policy. We're looking some of our oil producing OMCs are looking now towards the they're more towards energy companies now. So they're setting up or looking to set up SAF production units. For that, technology providers like you, like Praj, will play a very important role in ensuring that those technologies are in place to produce the SAF. That I would say would be point number 2. Your point number 3 is, as governments, we of course have your PM Jeevan Yojana, which looks at producing ethanol through 2G sources. You have even CBG production, which can ensure that CBG can be used even for heavier transports, and the extra ethanol, which is saved towards that, can be used towards SAF. We do have, we are undertaking pilot projects, as we had done with you, towards ensuring, that this is safe, because safety is an important consideration as well. Because when we're looking at aviation transport, we have to ensure that the fuels are safe, and that's one of the advantages of SAF. Being a drop-in fuel, they can be mixed with the existing ATF technology without necessarily having to undertake future challenges, which a whole different form of fuel source would require. So I think I may have put more questions than answered the questions, but to reiterate, I think there is international collaboration can do a lot towards this. There is a need to drive down the costs, the need to ensure that there is enough feedstock availability so that SAF is in a bountiful quantity that you can utilize it. Number 4, training of consumers is also I agree, a very important aspect. And in fact, Secretary Petroleum and Natural Gas, during just before the SEM, along with the Minister of Brazil, had participated in ethanol talks where he spoke to consumers about its advantages. And lastly, the importance of ensuring standards in place so that the decarbonization goals which we have set are ensured through 3 standards, so that we ensure the entire pathway from farm to wheel, from farm to air, in this case, has a low carbon credentials. I think those are the important areas. I think this is a very fertile area of cooperation, and both from the government side and as well, if you allow both you and Vikram to say from the industry side as well, we are looking to cooperate and collaborate to achieve these targets.
Thank you, George. In fact, you mentioned something very important about the fact that this is not only a developed world agenda. There are developing countries like India who have now set the standards of what is possible if there's a will. And I want to build on that dialogue, and I want to go to Gary for that. One of the key issues is also around the island nations of the world, which need to get included in this whole process of climate change, because they are theoretically and even practically the most impacted parties. But they are small in size, and how do we make sure that this also becomes an important agenda for them? How can island nations themselves adopt biofuels in their national energy programs, and what can be done to accelerate their inclusion? Because I think they are the nations that the humanity needs to be most worried about.
Absolutely, and for the even at the subnational level, I think all of the United States right now is mourning some fires that are burning on the island of Hawaii. I know that you're referring more to global sea level change, but whether it's in Southern Europe or whether it's in the United States or Canada or now on Hawaii, which I think is pretty surprising to a lot of people, we're facing both sea level change and we're facing uncontrolled fires, and so that's very disappointing. So to get to your question around the relevance of biofuels to small island developing states, this actually has been a topic for a while, because the challenge for small island developing states is one of, they frequently are very much dependent on fossil fuel imports, right? And so if you look at Jamaica, if you look at Barbados, if you look at Mauritius, if you look at Philippines, and so there's a, you know, you could even, I mean, even Indonesia considers itself a large island developing state. But if you look at these countries, many of them, first of all, are very dependent on fossil fuel imports. Second of all, they're very at risk for sea level change. In addition, a number of them have a long history actually with the sugar industry. And so there is frequently huge opportunities and very, very obvious opportunities for them to reap all of the benefits that come from a viable sugar industry. So a viable sugar industry produces not just sugar, of course, but it produces the molasses and it produces bagasse. And so my understanding is that a lot of small island developing states would really benefit from reinvestment and reinvigoration of their sugar industry. The problem is, as I understand it, is frequently their sugar industry, because the land volume is not as large, their sugar industry is a little less competitive. And so there hasn't been a lot of investment. But if the people were to invest, improve the boilers, you would have more bagasse available, and you would end up reducing your fossil fuel imports by consuming the bagasse either for direct power generation or for production of what we're now calling cellulosic or second generation fuels. So I do look at small island developing states as really providing an opportunity. And actually, going back to Hawaii for many years has been thinking deeply about how they can offset their demand for SAF by producing SAF on the island from their existing biomass resources. And so islands provide very interesting living laboratories and very interesting opportunities for very immediate rewards, because the cost of transportation to the island is so high. Any fuel that they substitute, the rewards are enormous. And so particularly if tourism is also a role, the opportunity for SAF production creates enormous economic benefits across the entire population of the island. That's how I see it. I'm not sure exactly what you're driving at, Shishir, but that's been my experience on the topic.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you for that very, very important observation. And maybe I will use this to leverage myself to next question to Jim. Jim, what it now says is, so small island nations, developing nations, there is this whole need for action in these economies, and it is a fact that these economies have not been the energy consumers on a per capita basis of the kind that the developed world is. And this debate that goes on between nations and governments and people and think tanks about who is responsible for what, the fact remains that CO2 emitted anywhere has the same impact. So do you see a role that the developed world can play constructively in especially providing funding mechanisms for these projects to go up in these economies, because they obviously are resource starved, as also to provide leadership on the technology and experience basis that could actually help acceleration of adoption of biofuels in both developing world as well as the island nations?
Thank you, Shishir. It is a very challenging set of co-competing issues. How can large countries, developed countries and developing countries help each other? We are codependent, and I can't speak with the U.S. policy hat, but I do think there is very much a responsibility of developed countries to help developing countries, small island states, to develop themselves, to develop their clean energy infrastructures. And it's no small challenge. Jerry mentioned Hawaii, and I personally spent about 1.5 years living and working in Hawaii on their clean energy transition. And it's a great role model of what can and can't be done. Hawaii at one time, as Jerry mentioned, was a major sugar producing state. I don't think there's a single sugar plantation left on Hawaii because it's been driven out by tourism. So Hawaii is another great example of there isn't sufficient land available on a small island to be completely self-sufficient, in particular from a fuels point of view. But what they can do is implement a number of co-supporting initiatives. Hawaii, again, as an example, is trying to be heavily independent from an electricity point of view. So they've deployed a great deal of wind and solar, and they're trying to transition their grids to be much more robust and able to handle variable electricity sources. But they still will be dependent on importing fossil fuels and hopefully eventually non-fossil fuels, renewable fuels like SAF and biofuels. And so it's a holistic approach that needs to be done in every island that I think it's unlikely that they can be completely self-sufficient. We will have to help them. So the larger countries are going to have to do their part in developing these technologies, lowering the price of these technologies, and making sure that they're widely available as world markets, that we can ship them, export them, import them at a reasonable cost to make them competitive and to fit into the greater energy transitions in each of these different countries, small island states, subnational levels, etc. So a lot of hard work that we all need to contribute. We need to be successful in the larger countries to help make them successful in the small island states, among other types of applications.
Thank you, Jim. There is one question, if I don't ask, my colleagues are going to kill me, and therefore that question has to come to Vikram. Vikram, everybody speaks about the fact that we need to transit to a different kind of energy mix for our road fleet in India, and EBP 20 program is definitely raised a lot of consciousness. It's also raised new challenges and questions. And when it comes to flex fuel vehicles and hybrid flex fuel vehicles, especially, we all start looking at Toyota. You've seen this landscape develop, and tell us, where do we stand today, and what's the roadmap for a large-scale adoption of flex fuel vehicles in our country?
Well, we've seen how impactful flex fuel vehicles and recently the electrified flex fuel vehicles have been in Brazil. They've actually given them energy independence a long time back. And I think the same thing can play out in India. We have ethanol, which is much surplus beyond E20, and that basically makes a good cause for having introduction of flex fuel vehicles as well as the electrified flex fuel vehicles. There are many companies who have brought out prototypes, including us. There are companies both in the two-wheeler space as well as the four-wheeler space who've shown interest and are currently developing products which can be introduced subsequently. So if you look at industry readiness, E20, everybody is going to be ready by 2025. BS6 compliant vehicles with E20, that's definitely on the table. It's happening. Already most of the companies' products are E20 compliant materially. As far as the flex fuel vehicles are concerned, I think around the same time, a lot of companies would be ready to introduce these. And the electrified flex fuel vehicle, which is the strong hybrid FFV, offers a very interesting, unique opportunity, in my opinion, to India. The opportunity that it offers is a twin benefit of much larger substitution of gasoline with ethanol, as well as heightened efficiencies. The electric powertrain that goes with the gasoline or the flexi fuel powertrain enhances the efficiencies by as much as 40 to 50%. So the consumer can get the twin benefit from this. The other, very interesting and very exciting prospect of looking at the electrified flex fuel vehicle introduction in India is that perhaps it will be the world's first BS6 compliant, because Brazil is a regulation away. Those vehicles are around BS5. So this could be a higher emission compliant vehicle, first of its kind. And this could offer an opportunity for many other markets to explore the possibilities of utilizing this technology. Now, the benefits from this technology are that you get the demand on the part side for both the flexi-fuel components as well as the electric powertrain components. So the two alternate energy pathways are not really competing, they're complementing. So such a technology actually helps you to build the electric ecosystem as well as the flexi-fuel ecosystem simultaneously. So besides that, the fact is that you need only a fraction of the expensive batteries that you would ordinarily need in electric vehicles when it comes to hybrid vehicles. So a flexi-fuel strong hybrid vehicle would have a battery of around 1.2 to 1.5 kilowatt hour, as compared to a comparable vehicle having a battery of 60 or 70 kilowatt hour, which in itself is not only very critical from economics point of view, in the sense from a point of view of the costs and the pricing to the consumers, but also, the import element of batteries is a concern area for a country like India. And with that, the impact is much, much higher. Clearly from Brazil, we've seen that the flexi-fuel strong hybrid electric vehicle has a well-to-wheel carbon footprint of around 29 grams to a kilometer, which is approximately, 1/3 of what can be seen with the current energy mix, electricity generation mix, battery electrics in many other countries, where coal continues to be a predominant source of electricity generation. So it also offers a much more rapid solution, a much more practical solution to decarbonization. So in fact, it's a very good technology fit for a country like India and many other countries that are similarly placed.
Thank you, Vikram. I know that the chat box has been buzzing, so there are questions that are coming to me, and I promise that we will also make sure that this is a more inclusive dialogue. So my team says that they are pushing the questions to me, trying to combine multiple questions if sort of they're driving to the same thing. So question is for George. Is there any plan for a policy on SAF in India? And will India allow to produce SAF in India and export to EU and USA?
So I think immediately, in fact, I go back to your pilot project. And in fact, during that, I think our minister had said we're really considering blending of 1%.
Yes.
We do realize that there's a policy support is required, but like in the government, we have to take multiple permissions that has to go through cabinet before we can say anything. But if the minister himself has said it, then I mean, you've heard it from his mouth. So there's nothing more I need to add to it. So of course, thoughts are going in play. The implication of what we can export and what we can import, I mean, that will be dependent on the policy. I don't want to presuppose anything. But as I'm sure you're aware that India it's a big aviation market. And one advantage, I think, globally, what we realize is any carbon effort, and I think Jim would agree with me on this as well, is any effort which we take to reduce the carbon emissions in one place, its benefits are felt across the world. So because that's why carbon emission reduction is not an India problem. It's a global problem. It's not a US problem. It's not a developed country problem. It's a global problem. So I don't want to presuppose this, but like I said, a lot of our OMCs are looking to set up SAF production units. The minister himself has said we could look at a blending mandate. As of now, of course, it's not out, as I'm sure we're all aware, but we have to take multiple stakeholders into consideration as well, including the consumers, and see how it impacts them. But these thoughts are ongoing. We are looking at all possible implications on how to ramp this up, because we will also fulfill our mandate requirements as well.
Thank you, George. Another question is it possible to think of a day when there'll be a uniform carbon pricing mechanism across the world? It's not addressed to anybody in particular, but maybe Jim and Gary, you can help answer from your side of the Atlantic. Do you see a common carbon pricing mechanism, because that would be crucial to trade of biofuels as we move forward?
Jim?
Jerry, I think that's an easy one, so I'll let you handle that.
Oh yeah, we already did that, Shashir. Didn't you hear?
Yes.
No, actually, I'm gonna answer in two ways. So for more background, there is this activity called the Clean Energy Ministerial, which we all actually saw each other at a few weeks ago in Goa. And we hosted a series of conversations with from people from around the world, whether from the Netherlands or from the United States or from India or Australia, and got a lot of inputs. And one of the driving inputs, both in Goa and in general through the work of the BioFuture platform that is part of the Clean Energy Ministerial, is the fact that there is this ambition to, as we like to say, to defossilize, right? Because we're going to need carbon molecules for a number of tasks, whether as liquid fuels or as chemicals, for a long time. And so the idea is to replace or substitute non-fossil carbon for that carbon in all of those plastics and chemicals and fuels that we need. And around the world, because of this recognition of this need, because of nationally determined contributions as per the Paris Agreement, because of the understanding of the broad-based economic benefits up and down a country's economy, countries are pushing for performance-based, carbon intensity-driven policies that reward products as a function of their ability to reduce their carbon intensity. And this is great. I think, as the question is alluding to, the responses are quite diverse. The policies are quite diverse. Even within the United States, we have an overarching federal policy that still is volumetric, right? And so we're used to the idea of blending mandates. But the world is moving toward, but blending mandates, which were absolutely essential to kickstart the sector, the world is, they're not really performance-based. The blending mandates were, I mean, there were categories of blending, but they didn't really monitor and track the benefits. And now we're in a new world, right? So the blending mandate started 15 years ago or more. And so now we're in this new world where we can actually track products, we can track their benefits. We are getting more comfortable with data management, big data. And so we can think about moving away from just encouraging a volumetric blend to actually encouraging a carbon intensity blend or a carbon intensity impact. And so one way to incentivize that is through taxation. Actually, Vikram spoke very eloquently about the strength of taxation policy to drive change in Goa, and I learned a lot from him on that. But what's happening is that we have Brazil doing one thing and California doing another thing and Indonesia doing something and maybe Japan. And then it gets even more complicated because not only do we have nationally driven, what you could call obligatory markets, right? So regulation driven markets. We have this whole other industry of what could be called voluntary markets, or also known as offsets. And the people that are regulating those voluntary markets, they seem to be doing their own thing. And this is creating a fair bit of confusion, because you have countries going, first of all, you have countries kind of going in different ways. And you have, NGOs or international organizations creating these other markets. And so there's so we're in a kind of an exciting growth phase, but now we've gotten to a point where it's difficult for individual companies to track all of this. And so what we're pushing for in the BioFuture community is more interoperability. Is we need, I don't know what the computer analogy would be, like a dongle or a modem or something that allows these different modes of regulating carbon to connect with each other. And so we're really excited about those conversations. We're pushing these conversations forward, and we don't have an answer. The idea that there's going to be, I'll stop in a second, but the idea that there is going to be one single carbon price is not going to happen for a long time. And I would say that what we're realizing, and I'll finish with this point, what we're realizing is that a major reason that we don't have a carbon price is because people haven't agreed on carbon accounting. And it's not so much that people don't understand life cycle analysis. It's just that each of these different jurisdictions have different priorities. And so they weight their carbon models differently. And so you end up with different values of carbon intensity as a function of where you are. And so if you can't agree on the value, if you can't agree on the accounting, it's really hard to put in place an overall price. And so these are the, so we have all these different sectors, whether it's maritime or aviation or road, and we have all these different jurisdictions. So it's a multi-dimensional problem. And this is an opportunity we want to harness that creative energy. We want to harness that ambition. And we just want to focus it a little bit, because that can lead to greater interoperability. And I think bringing forward the performance-based metrics that we all, and the technology agnostic performance-based metrics that we all, I think, in this community look forward to. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Gary. That was great, and it's good that it sort of starts to clarify the thinking around this very, very complex issue of carbon accounting.
I think Jim wanted to come in.
Yes, Jim, please.
Yeah, I could add just a little bit. Jerry did an excellent job laying out some of the challenges and the existing current status of carbon markets and benefits and volumetric requirements versus voluntary standards. It's going to take a while, but I think there's the opportunity through vigorous information sharing and vigorous co-development. We need to do the hard work in our own countries, but eventually I think there's the opportunity that as we come to a more common understanding of the challenges, the opportunities and benefits of these various technologies, that eventually we could get to a common market, a common way to look at things. I look at an example, for example, under the IEA Bioenergy Technology Collaboration Program. They've done a lot of work looking at the various LCA models, in particular, in some of the countries that have been more aggressively applying them. Europe, the US, Brazil, Canada, each have their own LCA type modeling tools. And when you compare them head to head, they actually come out quite comparable, quite similar in terms of the results. But what makes the results as they stand alone very different is that the input assumptions are often very different. What Brazil might assume are the on-the-ground conditions for ethanol might be very different in terms of inputs versus the US. And at times that is reality, because sugarcane production is very different than corn production. But there's an example of when we look deep at the details, our models are similar. Therefore, our appreciation, our understanding of reality can be similar if we can get to an honest conversation and agreement on the input principles. And biomass, as we all know, is very different around the world. Local situations, local opportunities are very, very different. And that's one of the beauties and challenges of biomass and bioenergy, is that it has to be locally adopted. But after it's locally adopted, and using technologies that can be developed anywhere and shared, we can, I think, get to a common understanding and appreciation of the benefits, and perhaps at some point reach agreement on how to do those calculations. And knock on wood, create a more common market, a shared market where we agree on approaches, on assumptions, and therefore we might even be able to trade in those markets at some point. But it's going to take a lot of hard work, a lot of international cooperation at an even much more enhanced level and pace and regularity than we're currently performing at. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jim. As they say that all good things must come to an end, we can, with four of you, I can keep conversing for next, I don't know, weeks. and we'll still not have a repetitive point because of your immense knowledge and experience in the area. But I just want to pick from where George said about pockets of development in seas of potential. That's something that's going to stay with us, and let's all work towards a world where it becomes seas of development as well, all across, and not remain as pockets. At Praj, we've coined a term biomobility to denote this whole movement of mobility, which is so basic to human progress. And we feel that biomobility actually denotes a desire to move to the use of those fuels which actually go about creating a higher degree of mobility, but with much lesser carbon emissions. And with that, I would like to thank my panelists today for sparing their time. And as we could see, we have moved on issues from taxation to nations to geographies to government policies to industry action, technology, including adoption by end users. And this is such a vast field that probably 1 hour does not do it a justice, but hopefully all of us and the other people who came to participate and listen to us have all benefited from this discussion. And this will help us to build the dialogue forward and make a more sustainable world. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you,
Take
George.
care.
Thank you, Vikram. Bye-bye.
Have a good
Thank you
day.
everyone
and we need to
for
talk soon.
joining. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.